Grade 7, Quiz 11, excerpt from Nature by Design. Paragraph 1. One evening when I was about 5, I climbed up a ladder on the outside of a rickety old tobacco barn at sunset. The barn was part of a small farm near the home of a country relative my mother and I visited periodically. Though we did not really know the farm's family, I was allowed to roam, poke around, and conduct sudden studies of anything small and harmless. On this evening, as on most of my jaunts, I was not looking for anything. I was simply climbing with an open mind. But as I balanced on the next to the top rung and inhaled the spicy stink of the tobacco drying inside, I did find something under the eaves. Something very strange. Paragraph 2. It appeared to be a kind of gray paper sphere, suspended from the dark planks by a thin stalk, like an apple made of ashes hanging on its stem. I studied it closely in the clear light. I saw that the bottom was a little ragged and open. I could not tell if it had been torn or if it had been made that way on purpose, for it was clear to me as I studied it that this thing had been made. This was no fruit or fungus, its shape rough but trim, its intricately colored surface with subtle swirls of gray and tan, and most of all the uncanny adhesiveness with which the perfectly tapered stem stuck against the rotten old pine boards. All of these features gave evidence of some intentional design. The troubling thing was figuring out who had designed it and why. Paragraph 3. I assumed the designer was a human being, someone from the farm, someone wise and skilled in a craft that had so far escaped my curiosity. Even when I saw wasps entering and leaving the thing during a vigil I kept every evening for 2 weeks, it did not occur to me that the wasps might have fashioned it for themselves. I assumed it was a man-made wasp house, placed there expressively for the purpose of attracting a family of wasps. Much of the Martin Hotel, a giant birdhouse on a pole near the farmhouse, was maintained a shelter migrant purple martins who returned every spring. I didn't ask myself why anyone would want to give wasps a bivouac. It seemed no more odd than attracting birds. Paragraph 4. As I grew less weary of the wasps, and they grew less wary of me, and as my confidence on the ladder improved, I moved to the upper rung and peered through the sphere's bottom. I could see that the paper swirled in layers around some secret center of the wasp inhabited, and I marveled at the delicate hands of the craftsmen who had devised such tiny apertures for their protection. I left the area in the late summer, and in my imagination I took the strange structure with me. I envisioned unwrapping it in the middle, finding, what? A tiny room full of bits of wool for sleeping and countless manufactured pellets of scientifically determined wasp food, a glowing blue jewel that drew the wasps at twilight and gave them a cool infusion of energy as they clung to it overnight. My most definite idea was that wasps lived in a small block of the fine cedar that the craftsmen had drilled full of holes into which they slipped snugly, rather like the bunks aboard submarines in World War II movies. As it turned out, I got the chance to discover that my idea of the cedar block had not been wrong by much. We visited our relative again in the winter. We arrived at night, but first thing in the morning I made straight for the farm and its barn. The shadows under the eaves were too dense to let me spot the sphere from far off. I stepped on the bottom rung of the ladder, slick with frost, and climbed carefully up. My hands and feet kept slipping, so my eyes stayed on the rung ahead, and it was not until I was secure at the top that I could look up. The sphere was gone. I was crushed. The object had fascinated me like nothing I had come across in life. I had even grown to love wasps because of it. I sagged on the ladder and watched my breath eddy around the blank eaves. I'm afraid I pitied myself more than apparently homeless wasps. But then something snapped me out of my sense of loss. I recalled that I had watched the farmer taking in the Purple Martin Hotel every November. After the birds left from its spruce appearance when he brought it out in March, it was clear he had cleaned it out and retained it and kept it out for the weather. Of course, he would do the same thing for this house, which was even more fragile. I had never mentioned the wasp dwelling to anyone, but now I decided I would go to the farm, introduce myself, and inquire about it. Perhaps I would even be permitted to handle it, or best of all, learn how to make one myself. I scrambled down the ladder, leaping from the third rung and landing in the frosty salad of the tobacco leaves and wind-swept grass that collected at the foot of the barn wall. I looked down and saw that my left boot had, by no more than an inch, just missed crushing the very thing I was rushing off to seek. There, lying dry and separate on the leaves, was the wasp house. Number 1. In paragraph 1, what does the reader learn about the young boy's character that has the greatest influence on the events of this passage? A. He's an intelligent person. B. He has no fear of the strange places. C. He is content to be alone. D. He has a lot of curiosity. 2. Look back at your answer for number 1. Which detail from the passage best supports the answer to question 1? A. This was no fruit or fungus. Paragraph 2. B. The troubling thing was figuring out who had designed it and why. Paragraph 2. C. We arrived at night, but first thing in the morning, I made straight for the farm and the barn. Paragraph 6. D. I sagged on the ladder and watched my breath eddy around the blank eaves. Paragraph 7. Number 3. Based on the excerpt, why does it seem logical to the narrator that a human being made the wasp house? A. The people on the farm created a birdhouse to attract birds. B. The latter takes people close to where the wasp house is hanging. C. The wasp house has been placed near the top of the barn. D. The wasps become used to having a nearby visitor watching them. Number 4. The author develops the central idea of the text by A. Describing how a young boy could examine the wasp's house close after the wasps left. B. Providing details about the young boy's adventures in the country. C. Describing the discovery and examination of a wasp's house by a young boy. D. Providing evidence for the wasp's house appearance and how it functions. 5. How does paragraph 5 contribute to the central idea of the passage? A. Paragraph 5 illustrates the narrator's growing fascination with the wasp nest. B. Paragraph 5 describes how the wasp learns to trust the narrator over time. C. Paragraph 5 describes how the wasp house eventually came to be at the farm. D. Paragraph 5 explains what the inside of the wasp house looks like and feels like. Number 6. The passage focuses on the narrator's interest in a particular object, the wasp house. Describe how the narrator's interest and understanding of the wasp house develops over the course of the passage. Use at least 2 details from the text to support your response.